Hey folks, Assalamu alaikum. Now, what comes to your mind when you think of the following word on this screen? Now, how many of us immediately thought of a faith crisis or losing one's Iman? For teachers, a crisis might look like a bored pupil sat at the back of a classroom. For many of us, it's about a state of confusion, i.e. not knowing who we are, what we believe in, or where we belong in the world. For a farmer, a crisis could take a slightly different form. He could find that one of his cows believes that she's a cat. Meow. Now for the Liverpool fans out there, well, you might find your favourite footballer, Mohamed Salah, missing from the match on a Saturday afternoon. Instead, he's found down at the local McDonald's branch sinking his teeth into a double cheeseburger. And to make it worse, he sat celebrating with the Everton fans. Now I know that's a cheesy example, but it's less controversial than finding him sat in front of the Christmas tree in a onesie, dressed up like Rudolph the reindeer. So we'll just stick to the animals for now. And who from amongst us thought of these guys? Yes, the teenagers, also known as Generation Z or by their cool name, Gen Zs. According to research by University of St. Mary's, 70% of teenagers will experience an identity crisis or crises. Now, if you're a Muslim teenager, well, that number is sadly a lot higher. 8 out of 10 British Muslim teenagers will experience an identity crisis. Now, the truth is, identity crisis is common, but it's also very complicated and dynamic. If we're going to tackle it, we need to understand it from the roots up. And for that, we need to take a deep dive into understanding the lived experiences of young British Muslims. Please watch this video as we invite 2 youth-led organizations, Ilm to Amal and Here for Youth, to start a conversation around the lived experiences of young British Muslims. In particular, we seek to identify the root causes and symptoms of their identity crisis and answer some burning questions such as: what happens to us when we lose our sense of purpose and belonging, and whose responsibility is it to tackle this crisis? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, leave your comments in the section below, and ring that bell notification. Until next webinar, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bismillah walhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of our participants, wherever you are joining us from in the world. I welcome you to the second webinar in the 7-part Tarbiyah series. Today's title for the discussion is addressing the identity crisis amongst young people. Whose responsibility is it? I'm your host, Waqaus Ali, and this is a Tarbiyah series for adults being brought to you by Ilm to Amal in partnership with Islamic Relief. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time and missed the first session, a little bit about Ilm to Amal. It's a creative arm of Knowledge to Action, and we specialize in character development and life skills education. You can follow our work at Ilm to Amal and also check out our resources on i2astore.com. From the screen, you can see we do lots of different things, from resources, curriculum development, stories and activity books, campfire tale stories, parent coaching and teacher training, to outdoor events, from retreats to residentials to social action initiatives. So there's a whole host of things that we do that brings learning to life for young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds. Do check us out. For those of you who sat in the last webinar, the recap, as you'll know, we talked about the changing world and the rethinking of education and Tarbiyah for the changing world. And we looked at 6 particular areas, looking at COVID and the effect of recent global events, such as the pandemic and COVID being a big one, and the impact that's had on the world today, but particularly on the lives of young children and parents and teachers. That led to a conversation around the education system, looking at the current problems with the education system and how that's been impacted, but also where we are heading in terms of the future of education. Ultimately, the session was about rethinking what we teach and parent to our children and how we nurture them. So that was session number 1, and this session follows on very nicely as a deep dive into the identity crisis that young people are experiencing based on action-based research, which I will come on to very, very quickly. For those of you who missed this webinar, you can get this in terms of the recording from our YouTube channel, which is there. Again, I'll just go back to that slide at Ilm to Amal. Please do subscribe to the channel and like the videos and leave your comments. You can catch the recordings of each webinar in this series on there. Moving on, today's topic, or the module for today from session 1 is spiritual and moral development, and that's how it fits into our modules for this particular series. So without further ado, I'll dive straight into some research and start the ball rolling before I introduce 2 of my guests. According to St. Mary's University, 7 out of 10 young people will experience an identity crisis. But according to Muslim Census, who conducted research on behalf of an organization called Here for Youth, and I have 2 guest speakers representing Here for Youth today, they concluded that actually this figure is a little bit higher for British Muslims. 8 out of 10 British Muslims will experience a identity crisis at some point in their teenage years or youth. Now, I'm honored to be joined by Ayub Seedat, who is the COO of Here for Youth, and his colleague Abdur-rahman Chachia, who's head of research, who both of these guests, mashallah, as you can see from their bios, have considerable amount of experience on the ground working for different Muslim organizations, and are involved in youth work and also working with institutions, key institutions such as mosques and madrasas. So I will come on to both of my guest speakers very soon. I'm just going to run through the format of today's webinar. As you know, it's always an interactive conversation between myself and the guest speakers, but more importantly with yourselves, the audience. So we'd love to hear from you. To do that, please do leave your comments in the chat section and questions in the Q&A bank. Don't mix the 2 up, otherwise we might miss the key questions, but please do keep them concise and also timely and relevant to the topic in discussion. Please do raise your hand. We do love hearing voices and hearing from you if you want to ask a question whilst the conversation is taking place. The format of the webinar will be delivered in 4 parts. We'll look at identity crisis, what it is and why do we experience it. Now, the research part of this angle is the fascinating part, because we have 2 organizations, 2 youth-led organizations, Ilm to Amal, the one I head up, and Here for Youth, the one Ayub and Abdur-rahman work for or are representing today. And both institutes, independent of each other, are conducting action-based research into the lived experiences of young British Muslims, or Generation Z, as you can see on the screen, and millennials. So for the record and just for clarity, if you're not familiar with those terms, these are terms that are given to different generations. Millennials, which I happen to be the last year of, belong to people who were born before 1981. So that's not, I can't remember the exact start date, but certainly anybody in and around the 70s or the 81 mark will be classed as a millennial. So I just happen to be in the last batch of that. And if you're born after 81, so in 82 onwards, up to 1996, you're classed as Generation Z or Gen Z, as it says on the screen. So this is all fascinating. And then after that, it's Generation Alpha, which my children, all 3 of them belong to. And so we're conducting research into the experience by Gen Z and or millennials, and it's fascinating to see how two organizations are looking at the problem, perhaps from different angles or perhaps same angles, we'll find out. And this is the first time we're coming together, so it's a really good opportunity to share some of the interim findings, because none of this is conclusive just yet. We're 6 months into our studies, and I think the other guys, we'll hear from them, are also on a similar timeline. So this is something like a 2-3 year study for us, and no doubt for them too. Part 3, inshallah, we want to get onto the key findings. What are the key observations or key interim findings? I should rather say, what's going on with our Muslim teenagers, and above all, and finally, we want to get to this conversation about whose responsibility is it? Because I can tell you from our research, the parents think, you know, the teachers need to be doing something, or the Imam needs to be doing something, and the Imam and teachers in schools and madrasas think that, well, this is a problem of the parents or somebody else is taking care of it. So we really want to ask the question, well, whose responsibility is it, and what can adults do about it? Now, without further ado, I want to dive straight into this conversation and put this question of what is an identity crisis and why do we experience it to Ayub from Here for Youth. Ayub, over to you.
You were in Birmingham, right? Aston Villa.
That's right.
And that, you know, football association is a big example, a great example, a great microcosm of plural identities. Like in my family, the big divide is between if you're a Manchester United supporter and a Liverpool fan. And, you know, we have whole, you know, family functions are organized and seating is arranged based on those factions. And, you know, lest the Liverpool fans sit with the United fans. But yeah, these, you know, and we live with these identities. But it's when those identities grow out of hand and they cause conflict. It also begs the question is, with all of these plural identities, what is our primary identity? You know, and as Muslims, our primary identity, we know, is to be a servant, is to be a slave of Allah, is to dedicate our life in worship, in servitude of the one who created us, who gave us life. Now, if that is you, if you call that your, you know, identity A, then how do you make all your other identities fit in underneath that? And that's really, that's the fun part. That's the interesting part. That's the conversations that we have with young people, you know, in our youth hubs about, okay, I'm a Muslim, but how can I also be a YouTuber? I'm a Muslim, but how can I also, you know, be involved in this or that? And I think we all experience it. You know, we all experience it. Whether it's in the workplace, whether it's just out and about, how you choose to dress. All of these are manifestations of your identity. And when one of those kind of identity markers comes into conflict with another, that's when you feel, that's what leads to, you know, mental health issues, anxieties. You know, so for example, there post 9/11, there was a real fear, not just in the Muslim community, but in the kind of the Asian subcontinental community, around wearing any kind of religious garb. You know, sadly in America, the research has shown that the Sikh community were disproportionately targeted because people thought they were Muslim, because they had, you know, turbans and beards, etc. You know, and when your identity as a Muslim comes into conflict with, okay, your personal, what you perceive to be your personal security identity on the streets, how do you square the two? And that's the interesting discussion.
Thank you for that, Ayub. That was fantastic. I think you explained the second question, which was I was going to ask, which was understanding what is an identity crisis, which I think you've explained quite well in terms of being multiple and quite complicated. It could be anything from a set of beliefs or values that you hold dear. That could be the choice of a football team or a particular brand, or you could.
Oh yeah, favorite one is iPhone versus Android. Wow, wow. Don't go into iPhone versus Android. You know, but these are all identities. You know, and why? And you have to ask yourself why you ascribe to it so strongly. Like people have visceral, physical reactions to these things.
I think that's a cracking question. What you've left it at the answer at, which was you have to question why you choose to belong to a particular brand. What is it that's resonating with you? What is it that drives you to say proudly that I am, X? And that's interesting. And I'm going to be relating a lot of this to sort of the research that we've been doing over the years. And this is going to be fascinating because we're two organizations who've just recently met. For the benefit of our audience, this is not something that we've concocted together because, we've just come together because we just accept that Muslim organizations out there are not the best collaborators. And our task of serving young people, regardless of their background, whether they're from a faith or no faith, whether they come from the north or the south or they're Man U fans or support Bradford City, the most important thing for us is to offer something back to the community. And we've got two organizations here who are taking a research-led approach. And it's fascinating that what you were saying there resonates with 10 years ago, why Ilm Tamil emerged. But before I shed some light on that, Abdur-rahman, coming over to you, is there anything that you want to add onto what Ayub was saying about what is identity and why do crises occur in young people?
So I think I'm definitely not as well read as Ayub on this, and mine is, I guess, more an on the ground experience of it. What I would add to what Ayub said is just kind of on the last question, why do we experience it? My observation has been, especially in particular to Islamic identity, where I think Ayub kind of covered what is identity and the many different facets to it. But from an Islamic identity perspective, why do we experience or why is this such an issue? I think it's because, for me, looking at the people around us, people that we work with on a youth basis, it's that religion and what religion means for a lot of these people's parents who are maybe first generation immigrants or even second generation immigrants. Religion and what Islam means and what it means to be a Muslim has been translated through culture. And as we now get to kind of maybe second, third, fourth generation immigrants who are firmly rooted in British culture, it's then the kind of that culture translates less and less, and it kind of gets weighed down as it goes through the different generations. And I think that translation of what it means to be Muslim and why we have these beliefs and these identities has been worn down. And I think the kind of there's not, like, with what you were saying about Apple and Android, there's very strong branding and very strong marketing as to why choose one over the other. And as a Muslim, it's not really there in terms of our education or kind of what's fed through to the parents, etc. So I think what causes identity crisis is you have maybe not a strong sense in yourself of what it means to be Muslim, but perhaps expectations of what your family expect of you. Compared to all of these other identities you are kind of trying to fit in with and relate to. So for me, that's what I kind of think drives it.
Brilliant. So some of the research that we've done, by the way, I must mention that both research studies are not conclusive at this stage. We've only just started the Ilm Tamil one in the last sort of 6 months, initially with focus groups from, I think it was October onwards. And we only got to the survey stage in December, and I'm going to come on to the research in a short while. But they're not conclusive sort of studies at this point. Same for you guys, I think that's right, isn't it? Ayub, your research is still in quite in the interim stages, and you're still collating the data and analysing the data.
Yeah, that's right. And I've put the link to the research in the chat for anyone who like Waqaus falls into the elder millennial category, to please fill it in. But the we'll come on a little bit later to what some of the early findings are. But just sticking with this topic of identity, if we've still got time for this segment.
We have. Sorry, can I just say before you just go to that part, if the audience would like to ask a question at this stage about the definition around identity crisis and the root causes and the complexity around it, now is a good time to post a question or raise your hand, and I can let you in. Ayub, please carry on.
No, it's a really interesting. I'm looking at the chat. There's some questions coming in, so we'll come to those. But really, what Abdur-rahman was saying, just to bounce off it, one of the reasons from the young people that we work, that we see this kind of crisis. And so, for example, Salim is asking, he's from Gen X, the whole notion of identity crisis. His novel to his generation, do we believe that identity crisis has always been present? I think what young people are seeing now is a big disconnect between what the morals and principles that are purported to them at home, and then the actual clash with what the actual practice of that is. So, for example, one of our close advisors works in a Muslim primary school, and we've had long discussions about, what is the purpose of an Islamic school. Sadly, for some parents, it's a form of kind of outsourced development, outsourced tarbiyah, that, oh, I'll drop my kids off to this, I'll pay for this private Islamic school, primary, secondary school. I'll drop them off, and, they will raise the child for me according to Islamic principles. But when the child comes home, they're not seeing those principles reflected in their life, in their reality. In their school identity, they're being told about Islam and worshipping Allah, and the first thing that you'll be asked about on the Day of Judgment is your salah. And they come home and they're not seeing those same morals, those same principles reflected in the practice of their parents or the practice of their wider family. And again, that causes a clash. So the question is that, okay, at what age does this happen?
Yeah.
Sadly, this is.
Sorry, Ayub, to interrupt you, but that was my next question to either yourself or Abdur-rahman. At what age? This is a question one of the audience put in the pre-arranged question. That what age does, and I think you're just going to address that, what age do teenagers, young people experience identity crisis, and do we know the patterns?
So I'm sure there is a whole world of clinical psychology on this, but from our experience of engaging with young people, this is happening at a younger and younger age. So pre, Gen Alpha, if you want to say, or even younger than that, before technology became so pervasive and prevalent, the exposure that a young person had was very limited. It was their family, mostly, and then it was their school that they went to, and that was about it. And up until the age of up until their teenage years. But what we're finding now is with access to technology, you have 2, 3, 4-year-olds with their own iPads who are able to navigate the internet at will without any parental supervision. And I say this because I have children of those age, and my children navigate the internet without parental supervision. And it can lead them to lots of interesting and lots of dangerous places as well. And so, if you define, if you define your identity as a Muslim, and we'll take that as primary identity, and your 6, 7, 8-year-old stumbles across, debates and lectures and, neo-atheism and liberalism and feminism, and they're absorbing all of this content, this is when those questions start to emerge. And by the time they get to secondary school, by the time they get to primary school and then secondary school, combine that with kind of national curriculums and things like that, this kind of disparity between the two starts to grow. So when does it start? It starts as soon as exposure to other than their, what is meant to be their safe space, their home environment, their protected environment begins, sadly.
Okay, there's a good question there from Edward Bainton. I don't know if you've seen it, but I think you kind of touched upon it towards the end in answering it. I hope, Edward, finding an overview of exactly what identity means, in these contexts would be helpful to understand what actually is in conflict. I think you touched upon some of the earlier. You touched upon some of the different sort of identities. Or that's one thing, and then second to that is underlying of those identities, is what you were touching upon. There's certain set of beliefs or values that define in that, or allow you to choose those identities. Now, I was going to add earlier on, when you hit the point about, you know, there's something that they believe in and there's something they sort of drive their identity from. 10 years ago, when I did the research with young people, and again, this was a casual research with as many people as I could in the different communities I was serving, and that led to the foundation of Knowledge to Action. The conclusion was that actually what forms identity, and this is based on the work of Eric H. Erickson, and he's a guy who, just on the side note, if I'm not wrong, he's the guy who coined the term midlife crisis. So if anyone who's suffered a midlife crisis, that's because Eric H. Erickson, who's a well-known psychologist, coined this term. His work on identity is quite profound, and he talks about sense of purpose, sense of belonging, and sense of responsibility, not in those exact terms, but this is what I found that over the last sort of 10 years, or 10 years ago, when we were doing the ground research for education reform and what kind of ways to help young people, and this is going back into 2008 to 2012, as I mentioned. The three things that came out, what young people either formed a strong identity or they lacked an identity or had a weak identity, were three things: having a sense of purpose driven by a set of values that they can define as for them to be them. That led to a sense of belonging with people who share the same values. And then there was a sense of responsibility that they got from that identity. That identity gave them a sense of responsibility to fulfill their purpose and to fulfill the values or the belief systems or what. And so I saw this pattern between three things. And if I could say to the educators, I mean, this is why we built a whole entire organization on this founding, this you know, sort of revelation, if you want, that our education in the classroom and our parenting should be reinforcing three things, whether it's 60 minutes in a classroom or whether it's basically, you know, a soundbite: a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and a sense of responsibility. I just hope that goes some way towards answering Edward's, on top of what you've already said, question. So thank you for that, Edward. That's a lovely question. Fantastic.
One other kind of one other interesting thing to throw into the discussion is a lot of what we're talking about here is predicated on language, you know. So what does it mean to be a believer? In fact, what does it mean to be practicing? You know, even what does it mean to be a non-Muslim? You know, some of these distinctions, we use them, you know. Oh, so-and-so is practicing, not practicing, they're a believer, they don't believe, you know, all of these kind of things. We use them without thinking. You know, language is the most powerful tool. In fact, it's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us that differentiates us from all other beings, is that the ability to think and reason and communicate. You know, the Quran starts with Iqra, you know, for a reason, you know, you have to read and understand. But yes, when it comes to identity, the language that we use around it is really, really important. And we need to start using language that is common, that we all understand, you know, especially with young people. You know, even, you know, we don't need to go to extremes about it, but, you know, there is nothing wrong with saying that we submit to one God. You know, that is a common language now. English is the lingua franca of our country, you know, for those of us born and raised, you know, it's our primary language. It's not Arabic, it's not Urdu, Gujarati, Hindi, you know, it's English. And so when young people are when you converse with them in language that they understand, they're able to grasp it and you know, and engage with it better. But it's really interesting. And once we start using common language, you'll realize there are more similarities than there are differences.
Absolutely. So just to confirm, it was sense of purpose, sense of belonging, and sense of responsibility, just for those questions in chat. Some people have asked if my mic has changed or anything has changed with my mic. Not at all. Is that clear? You can hear me? Just checking.
Double check your input. Maybe it switched around.
Right. Can you hear some background noise? Yeah.
I think it's okay.
Thank you, Dida. You can hear me clearly. Fine. Okay, so moving on. If I could bring back Abdur-rahman, if I could just resume again, sorry.
Yep.
Now, moving on to the research that your team has done, looking into the lived experiences of Generation Z and Millennials. We've defined them already, so we should be kind of familiar with that. So 81 plus, 1981 onwards, you're a millennial. Like me, I'm the last surviving millennial out there. And I'm known as the elderman now. Ayub keeps poking fun at my white hairs in my beard. And then you are Gen Z if you're born from 1996 onwards up to around about 2010. After that, if you're how old are you? If you're 11 or 12, who's joining this right now, you're in Generation Alpha. You should be outside playing somewhere. You know, here we go. So there's a question here from the audience, which was to do with the research that you've taken. Firstly, if you just take a step back, why is there a need for this type of research into Muslim teenagers specifically?
So I think we kind of touched on it before. So I think it's twofold, and I'll expand on it a little bit. So I think the first factor is, as we mentioned, that there's the rate at which these identity crises are rising is becoming more rapid due to access to technology and not even access to technology. It's not even like people can access the internet now. It's like the way technology is moving on, things are kind of blowing up quicker and influencing people's identity at a faster rate. So if you compare, for example, you know, how Instagram might have done that versus how TikTok does it, and it's like the virality of these sensations is getting more effective. So as that increases and becomes more prominent, that is going to cause the identity crisis to get, you know, to get worse. I was wondering if get worse is the right idea, but I'd say like the identity gap between kind of like, you know, being Muslim and being everything else, I'd say that it's going to make the identity gap increase, I think. And second is because, as I mentioned, that as the identity gap is increasing, what are our institutions, our parents, you know, our mosques, etc., any institutions that will help establish what a Muslim identity is, what are they doing about it? And the answer is either, you know, something, but maybe it's just, you know, someone's opinion, as opposed to, okay, these are the actual facts of what's going on, or they're not aware of it, or they kind of, you know, just think it doesn't exist at all, and are kind of raising the people that go to their maktabs or giving advice to parents that is, you know, very out of date, you know, and not in line with all these other changes that are happening. So like for me, I think those were, I guess, the two key factors as to why this needs to be done, and also to like just generally to raise awareness. As you said, like, you know, you said there are people who either kind of get it or don't think it exists, and you know, for there to be any momentum, I think we need to really, as a first step, get everyone, you know, almost on the same page, or as much on the same page as possible, with saying, actually, look, these are the problems. And it's not just, you know, me saying, look at my my circle of 10 friends, they're all doing X, Y, and Z and all don't really know who they are. It's actually, we've surveyed youth up and down the country, and this is my kids, your kids, you know, your and it's going to get worse for your grandkids, right? Like if we didn't do anything about it now. So it's really to kind of raise that awareness and hopefully open people's eyes.
Absolutely, good points there. Just what Edward said about, you know, what exactly is at stake here, what we're talking about here, what's the conflict, and just to clear that up, if we get into the third part, we'll understand some of the findings, interim findings, I must say, because it's not conclusive yet. But some of the findings on the ground that we're getting from the very, very small sample size, both your organization, my organization have been researching, and of course that over time, the next 3 years, we'll get a bigger sample size, I guess, and trying to understand some of the real issues that are affecting young people. But the question, there was another question in that, how did you actually go about your research? So let's just talk about your research for a few minutes. If the audience would like to ask any questions about anything that's already been said, or the actual research methodology that either Ilm to Amal or here for youth have adopted. By all means, now is a good time to ask that question. So just tell us a bit more. I think, Abdur-rahman, are you heading the research more than Ayub? Or
I think it's definitely a joint effort. Yeah, I'd say I'm heading it, but we've definitely I drag in Ayub into everything. So yeah.
So tell us a bit more about the research and how it came about and how you're getting on so far.
So the research came about essentially, like, this has been almost going on for 5 years. If we start from the origin story, it started off when the Muslim Council of Britain.
Is this your hero story or your villain story? Your origin story, huh?
Both, depending on how you look at it, I guess. It started off when Muslim Council of Britain had asked me to kind of, I was on one of their youth panels because I was doing the youth work at the mosque. And I'd gone on to one of their youth panels and they wanted to do a survey about kind of what people want from the mosque. And then that kind of, it didn't really pan out. I don't think the reach was there from that side. And then Ayub asked me to help Islamic Network with the same thing. And we started off with this survey of, okay, what do you want from a mosque? And it was quite basic. It kind of started off as like, okay, do you want an Xbox night or a PlayStation night, cricket or football? And then over the space of like 2 years, we kind of developed it into actually, we could do so much more with this survey because even if you look at, and we have a diagram. I know you asked us if we had a presentation, which like we didn't send, but actually we've got this diagram that I've been banging on about for years. And it's actually, I think when you take a step back and you look at the Muslim community and how we think it is, so I guess what would be our hypothesis of our research essentially is we are saying, if you look at the Muslim population and imagine that kind of there are various circles representing the kind of size of that population and the scale of religiosity. So on my right side with this hand up, you've got like a very small part of the population that is actually very practicing, and the majority of the population on the scale is probably actually less practicing or not that concerned with their faith. And and we think that actually what mosques and institutions and what everyone is focusing on, all of our dawah efforts, 50% are probably focused to, teaching others who are not already Muslim about the faith. And then the other 50% is already focused on the already religious. So the people who are already practicing, and the topics are about like, detailed fiqh and all these other things. But actually there's about, 60, 75% of the population that are not engaged with the religion at all. And are, very, very varying on the scales. And obviously we can't judge, but our hypothesis is that actually those people are varying on kind of, being potentially Muslim by name only to like, whatever else, like a whole spectrum of things. And it's not our place to judge, but we're saying actually we want to do some research to prove that this is the case, and then shift what organizations are doing to make sure we cover the whole population. Was the, I guess, the origin story of our research. Okay. Because we feel but that by ignoring that 60, 75%, that's the kind of gap in terms of, what are our institutions doing? They're already focusing on the, 15, 20 people that turn up to the mosque as opposed to the 100 people that don't.
It's that good old phrase, a lot of our efforts, we're preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
Our services, our activities, our retreats, our classes, they're advertised to the converted, they're taught to the converted, preaching to the choir is another way of putting it. But yeah, what we wanted to find, like Abdur-rahman said, is what, let's get to the people who aren't in those circles. How do we understand what are the struggles that they're facing? Because Abdur-rahman's absolutely right. And for those, again, the language matters. If you consider yourself, quote, practicing, and then you make fun of people and you call them Jummah Muslims, or you call them now Ramadan Muslims, or you call them Eid Muslims, these are all labels, these are all identities. But what is driving those different groups of people? No one's done research into that, and that's really what makes our distinction different. If we want to hear primarily from those people.
I've got some points to add on to both of your perspectives there about this answer that you've given, but Hamza's had his hand up for a while. Thank you, Hamza, for your patience. Hamza, you want to ask a question? And if it's now's a good time for you to ask, please ask your question.
Firstly, sorry, so I work with Ayub and Abdur-rahman here for youth.
This is a halal hijacking.
Right. Hamza, you can take over. I'm off now for I'm off for the afternoon. Thanks for the shift change.
No, so like just before that, so in terms of like identity, who we are, why we're purpose, belonging, these type of things, right? And Ayub touched on like language, etc. So if we look at, I think Tariq Ramadan speaks about a lot of this stuff in his work actually. But what you'll find is we have many layers of identity, but what unites us is that we're believers. We believe in one God. We submit to God, etc. One, like making that really clear in how we speak. But the second, then there are other stages. For example, people come from single parent households. People, young men and women don't have siblings around. So whilst we take a research, so in certain audiences, we say we take a research approach to our work, and we take a work approach to our research as well. We've worked with hundreds of mosques on the ground, etc. We come across young people who have said, look, only 2 weeks ago, I found out that my mother was involved in prostitution, you know? And actually, sorry for just bringing that up without a warning, for any like apologies for that.
Sure.
But people do have different experiences. So the identity crisis can start in different ways in different stages. But what led us to our research was one of the things we realized, and this is in our framework when we work with mosques and other organizations, is that actually sometimes we don't actually need to always give a solution.
Yeah.
What we need to actually understand is what the young people are. Not everything even needs to be looked at a national level. The young people that we serve, what is it that they're hungry for? What do they need? What are their problems? And that's within our framework. So when we came up with the idea of the research, it's actually how do we communicate with young people? One of the things that we find is to want people to be attracted to the work that you're doing, or if you want to help people, you have to attract them with what they identify with, what they're into. So if someone identifies with nice cars, when you're running an event, you use nice cars in the advertising of the event or as part of the event because they do identify with that. So that's also like it's really important to also like we take being a believer as one side. It doesn't mean we brush everything away, you know. We actually understand that and have this conversation with young people around that as well.
Thank you, Hamza, for your contribution there. Very useful, alhamdulillah. Thank you. So I was going to add some points to this, but I think it's important to, because of the light of time, just get into the real sort of interim findings as we're saying here. So if I could, I'll park my thoughts on hold because they're not as important as the next part. And I think, inshallah, if there's anything to add at the end, I will do. So just moving on to the third part of this presentation. This was something that I had done earlier, but we can come back to this, inshallah. In terms of your key findings that you had, what was your, I guess, the main alarming things so from the research that you're doing at the moment and you're collating the data at the moment, as we said, it's very early on, but from the surveys and what you've seen so far, what stuck out to you as like key things that you can tell parents and educators who are on this webinar with us today? What were the things that basically have stuck out for you?
Still off mute, right? So yeah, so like you said, I think we're still in the very early stages of our research and our data gathering actually. But some of the kind of key points that I pulled out from the initial data that we have. So some of the questions we asked are around kind of like what kind of addictions do people suffer with, or what habits. I think some of them confirming kind of what we already know. So in terms of, for example, like pornography addiction, we have that at 35% for people aged 16 to 40. And that's obviously higher in males, so 57% of men and 18% of women. I think I don't know. We haven't got our full report and kind of links to other research that has been done. So I can't give those comparisons yet. In terms of young Muslims who struggle with their gender identity, with their sexuality, that's higher amongst women. So 7% of women and 6% of men.
Right.
And I think the most alarming thing that came out of this question in terms of kind of things that a person might struggle with would be mental health. So overall, people 16 to 40, 43% said they struggle with mental health, of which there's 52% of women and 31% of men. So that was quite high.
Sorry, sorry, Abdur-rahman, could you just repeat that again for our audience, because I know it'll come up.
Yeah.
The statistics there.
Yeah, so 43% in terms of struggling with mental health. That was a total of 43% of people aged 16 to 40, with 52% of women struggling with mental health and 31% of men struggling with their mental health. And the last one, which, to be honest, I think as we carry on our research and our sample collecting, is we ask a question in our survey as to how people identify, whether they identify as Muslim, culturally Muslim, or born Muslim but not practicing. I think, and I think this number is a bit higher, but currently from the data we've got, that's at 5%. So 5% of people have actively identified themselves as kind of just Muslim by name, or born Muslim but not practicing. So that's interesting. I think on its own it's interesting, but I think that number probably is a little bit higher once we reach out, once our survey has reached all of the right demographics. I think that number will move up a little bit.
So just to recap, what would you say are your top three then concerns for young British Muslims?
I guess one would definitely just be identity in general.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't touch on doubts in the faith either. I think that was right. I can't remember if that was at 30 or 40%.
Wow.
But yeah, those who had experienced doubts in their faith, that was, let's just go with 30. I just be on the safe side. I think it was around 30%. So doubts in faith and mental health issues, and to be honest, from this small sample of data I've picked, I say pornography probably just because of the amount of kind of the high percentage of people it affects. Just to, I guess, caveat, this is just a sample of some of the questions we asked. We have some actually very interesting stuff in there, which hopefully, inshallah, we will get to talk about perhaps at another webinar. But just in terms of kind of what people want to see more of, what they struggle the most with in terms of their identity, whether that's like, role models or a lack of role models, influence from other, like from kind of more liberal society, and for example, how beneficial they found madrasa education, whether they value being part of a strong community or just going to the mosque for its virtues. So we have a lot of interesting stuff in there, but unfortunately, these are the only things I could pull out for this webinar, but I think so interesting.
I totally empathize with you, Abdur-rahman, because I think we have something like 60 or 72 questions. It's quite a long, detailed sort of survey. It only takes about 15. It's not as bad as it sounds, but you have to ask those questions. So the amount of data that we've got back from about 1,000 young people and 1,000 parents is fascinating. It's just like, it's a treasure trove. It takes months to analyze, and I appreciate that you can't really just give me some short answers, because there's a lot there that you will need to sort of analyze, and that's data analysis is, art in itself. There's a question here from Edward again. What sample size are you dealing with currently on your side?
So in terms of the number of samples we've collected already, it's around 1,400.
Okay, all right, we're not too far off in terms. And there's so I was looking at the data population of the Muslim teenagers in this country, and our pool size, there's no sort of fixed data in terms of exactly how many young people are there between the ages of 13 and 19 or 21. You have to sort of cut the sample size down and use different statistics to get to an estimation. We've estimated that there's about 300 to 100,000, 500,000 between, so let's say on average 400,000 young people between 13 and 24. Now that, if you look at the statistics, it should sort of line up and all add up. Now, out of 400,000 young people out there, young Muslims, and we know Muslims are the youngest by faith group, you know, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 is not a real big sample size. So we recognize that. Now, in terms of just going on your 3 points that you mentioned you mentioned doubts in faith, gender identity, mental health, and pornography as sort of the top issues. Very, very quickly, because I know there's a question that needs to be answered. These were our interim findings that I shared with people just the other day. And again, I've just plucked the top ones. There are many, many more out there in our analysis that's still being collated. But if you look at the question here was about, is identity crisis different for boys and different for girls? That's a key question that we were asking in the hypothesis of this survey. And it's a key question that we need to address as a community, because the findings that we are getting, the interim findings, from our 1,000 responses so far, which we recognize is not a lot compared to what the overall pool size is, 4 out of 5 Muslim girls feel that for them, their mental health is affected by something else. So mental health isn't the problem. The root cause of that is the gender inequality that they face at home, where they feel that Islam is fair, but the culture around Islam and the Muslim culture, and particularly the culture of their parents, makes their faith at home and their being in the society, in the world, unequal to their siblings who are males. So they feel gender inequality for young girls, we found, to be higher than anything else. Even doubts, even higher than doubts, was actually gender inequality. And you know, the parents' culture and the biases that come with that led to poor mental health and crisis in their faith. And I have to give it to some of these young girls. In fact, majority of the young girls I felt, I left every focus group. I've done 12 of these now in the country in different regions, over 2 hours each. I've left every focus group empowered by what I've seen and what I've heard, that despite inequalities around these young girls, they're very, very proud, convicted Muslim, you know, conviction, with Muslims with conviction. And it just made me realize that, well, you know, that's the experience is not so good. They're seeing unlevel playing field, but they found, you know, they're proud to be Muslims, and they want a correct understanding of Islam, which is not polluted by cultural differences. And you can see from other sort of statistics, we don't have the time to really go into this. Boys, on the far right, you can see there, from the sample size that we've done, which again was small, over 80% of the boys that we felt, they were having a different type of identity crisis through frustration of peer pressure, expectations of them, lack of freedom, lack of responsibility that's been given to them, and many of them expressing boredom, both at home and in the institutions they attend. Now, at the bottom, there's a key point here, which I just wanted to stress, which was parents actually think, going back to your statistics, interim statistics that you mentioned there, that the gender identity, in other words, what the orientation is and what they feel in terms of, if I've understood that as the right thing about the orientation, sexual orientation, and their identity. I mean, I know gender identity is much more than that, but you know, 6% and 7% is not a lot. Whereas 49% of the Muslim population is female, and 4 out of 5 that we are speaking to feel that it's unfair. Islam is unfair towards them, and it's not really Islam, but it's the culture of their family, and also misogyny that basically makes them feel really, you know, inferior. And this is interesting because when we've done the same survey with parents, parents think that the #1 root cause of their identity crisis is relationships and sex education, or, you know, sexual orientation or media. So I'm just throwing this out there. That was interesting. I didn't want to steal the thunder there, but there's many other stats that we've got here. I shared these on the Sunday presentation, and again, I'm just conscious that I'll be taking over the presentation, but I just wanted to throw that your way. Did you come across anything in your research about gender inequality?
It's really interesting. This entire area that we've come into about gender identity, and what it leads to for us really is a conversation about how we as parents and educators and teachers, etc., how we create environments for people to experience what Islam really says about these issues. Like in your interim findings, what they're taking issue with isn't to do with the religion. They're taking issue with a cultural implementation or a flawed cultural implementation of what of what they think the religion dictates in this certain area. And so part of the work that we do on the ground with our youth clubs is giving young people experiential Islam. If you give a young person, you give a young woman or a young man the space to really express themselves, explore their identity, surround them with positive role models, and give them the opportunity to express those positive character traits that we want to see in our society. With the help of God, they'll live productive lives, and we've seen that with the young people that we work with, who've come from. And again, the data gets really interesting when you filter just for young people who've come from single parent households and they don't have both a maternal and a paternal role model in their life. And it gets even more interesting when a young person doesn't see that either of their parents can be taken as role models. But for us, really, the work that we do on the ground with our youth clubs is about creating spaces where young people can experience what Islam really has to offer for them. And again, it's not a one size fits all. That's the beauty of course, the united colors of Islam. Alhamdulillah.
Just conscious of time, we're down to our last 5 minutes, and then we haven't got onto the solutions which we wanted to get onto. But I just want to correct something which my colleague has pointed out, that the mental health, what we found in the survey actually was, alongside gender inequality, were the two main factors that we found above doubts in Islam. So many people think that people's weakness of Iman, or they're getting doubts, is a vast majority, or they're getting they got conflict with their sexual orientation and the Islamic values. That's what we found to be the big difference, is that adults think those are the two issues, that they're being brainwashed, or there's this indoctrination that's taking place. And what we're finding on the ground, actually, more than that, is that that's not the issue. The issues are around gender inequality for young girls. That's not to say mental health as a standalone is not an issue. I'm sorry if that came across like that.
These are all symptoms. They're all symptoms. They're not the root cause. And this is it. If we can address the root cause.
Difference between, exactly. And so, and in many cases, the gender inequalities does lead to the mental health issues. But that's not to say it's not standalone. For boys, again, mental health takes a different form, and your statistic of 31% of males coming forward, that's because many of us we see as a weakness to talk up and open up about it. But I'm just conscious of time. This deserves a full-on session. Just each section you could take half an hour just on each section here. So I'm just conscious of time. What I want to do is, I think some of the key things that you're talking about, we're also seeing those things in our survey. Maybe the statistics and the numbers are different, and the order of prioritization might be different. We're seeing mental health, we're seeing gender inequality, we're seeing lack of life skills, lack of freedom, lack of role modeling is a big issue. There's a number of factors to get down to the root, and you're seeing other factors which mirror some of the percentages we got, maybe not to the same extent. So I think there's definitely some correlation there. And for our folks who are listening, both reports, the interim reports, I guess ours is 3 years, so we probably will produce something towards the end of this year. And I'm sure you guys are looking to produce some findings and share a manifesto towards the end of this year. So that'll be something interesting for the community to look out for, with key findings and key recommendations, because we're not going to be able to cover everything. We're just touching upon on the main things here. Now, last but not least, whose responsibility is it to fix this identity crisis? Is it fixable? Can we help them? And by saying we, I'm talking about the people who are here on this webinar, the parents, the educators, the youth workers. And I have a question. I also have a question from someone, but if you just answer, one of you want to take that question first?
It's a really interesting one. It's summarized by a very famous African proverb, which is, it takes a village to raise a child. The responsibility is us, for all of us as a community at every different level. Young people, young Muslims, young people, young men, young women, when they see the world around them is so different from scene to scene. Their family life is completely different to their school life. Their school life is completely different to their after school life. Their friend cycle are completely different. It can and does lead to these fracturing of identity. But if we can work together, and we can mesh the two, we can create spaces where young people don't have to be different people in different settings. That's one of the steps forward, and that's one of the things that we create with our hubs is, you leave your baggage at the door. We want people to be their authentic selves when they come in, and sometimes as parents you may not like like something about your child, but giving them the freedom and the space to explore that. We all go through periods of learning and phases, and you come out of it because you have space to grow and experience, and you have space, perhaps to make mistakes. We're very intolerant as a community. So one of the, with the young people that we work with, part of our development, we have our own youth engagement framework that we train our youth workers on. And as part of the youth engagement framework, stage 3 of it is about giving young people opportunities to take on responsibility, and most importantly, when they fail, have their back, because that's life. That's life. Failure is just a data acquisition process. I tried this, it didn't work, what have I learned? Let me try it again differently. But if we criminalize failure, if we criminalize mistakes for petty things, one of our youth workers who runs a hub in East London, his experience of going to the mosque as a young person was that he was held by the scruff of his neck out of a window because he closed his Quran, his mushaf, and it made a little clapping, close a bit hard. Young person. His teacher at the time grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and held him out of a second floor window. Now, that formative moment in his life had long-term consequences, but eventually has led him to now being a youth worker in East London, working with young people to ensure that that doesn't happen to young people, but young people have an opportunity just to express themselves and to grow. So really, for us, the root causes come down to three key things. If we can help young people to be confident in their identity, their identity as Muslims, as British Muslims, if we can surround them with positive role models, both contemporary, both real physical people around them, but also there's a growing disconnect with our historic role models. Young people don't know about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the Sahaba, or the generations that came. They're taught about it, yes. There's books on it, there's kitabs that they learn in madrasa, but it's not real to them. If we can make access to these historic role models real, and they can understand, so for example, you tell a young woman today that, let me tell you about someone who was so wealthy that they single-handedly bankrolled the entire Muslim endeavor for a number of years without any credit, without any credit, without anyone knowing so much about it, who employed men in a time when it was a super patriarchal society, who would send men to do her bidding, who would turn down suitors left, right, and center. And then you say, oh, that was Khadija radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Suddenly, young women go, oh, what? I can actually be an entrepreneur. I can employ men. I can boss men around. I can be a businesswoman. And at the same time, contribute to, be a huge part of society. making, and that's just one example of how we make our historic role models real to young people. They, you know, for us who get on a journey and we come to Islam at a later point in life, we find this for ourselves. We pick up books like, you know, the Sealed Nectar, and we marvel. We need to start translating that at a younger age for young, you know, for younger people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Abdur-rahman, if there's anything I missed.
No, I think it was fairly comprehensive.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of the time. The quote that you said, my colleague Zahra, who very beautifully always cites Eileen Sendray, and she has a quote which is in chat at the moment, and I think it's so pertinent. It really is important to understand this quote. You mentioned the child. It takes a whole village to raise. Yeah, it takes a village to raise a child, as the African proverb goes. Eileen Sendray says the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth.
Absolutely.
And we can. I've seen that for the last 15 years, and I'm seeing that in my research. Now, there was a hand up. I just want to say to our attendees that we are over time. If anybody who wants to stay, we could roll this on if our guest speakers are happy with that, just for another 10 minutes, because I think the questions are coming through now, and this we had a build-up to get to this stage, but we just ran out of time. So if everybody's okay to roll over for another 10 minutes to 4:30, and we can close at 4:30, if that's okay. If you need to leave, by all means, do so, and thank you so much for joining us. We will carry the conversation on. Is that okay, folks, for another 10 minutes? To just do justice to some of these questions. There's a question here. I think somebody had their hand up. I'm just trying to find who's got their hand up. Idle Farah? Idle Farah, I hope I pronounced that right. Let me get Farah in. Okay. So, unmute you. Okay. Yes, I hope I pronounced that right, Idil.
Oh, it's Idil. I
Idil,
just wanted
sorry.
to ask. No, it's okay. I just wanted to ask when the other sessions were.
Oh, okay. So towards the end of this presentation, I will give you a slide. The next sessions will be on the weekend. You'll see more details at the end of this presentation, but also on the Eventbrite website, inshallah.
Okay, can I ask one more question as
sure.
a parent? I wanted to know how important is knowing your own identity to raising kids. Should you, as a parent, I guess I'm a millennium or, you know, 80s child. I wanted to know, should I first be concerned about knowing my own identity and, like, you know, be clear with that before I go on and try to teach my kids? I know it's a straightforward question, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
I thank you for that, Adil. For me, it's also a straightforward answer. Is that the crux of this webinar series and the program that we're doing here for adults is about your development, your journey is integral to the journey of the child. And it needs to be done in balance, that we don't overshadow the development of our children with our own journey, which was for a different time. That's a statement of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, where he says that don't raise your children at a time that was for you and it's not for them. Very similar to that for me, I think it's a very simple, straightforward answer, that I do feel that your own identity and you being comfortable in your identity is important for you to demonstrate that journey and, you know, being comfortable in your skin to your children. And that's the short answer I would give. Ayub, Abdur-rahman, if you want to add anything to that, or we can move on.
What I would say, great question, is that don't see yourself as different to your child. You're going on a journey as much as they are going on a journey, and use it as something to bring you together. You know, use that journey, use it to, you know, explore together. You know, there will be things about Islam that you're, you know, we don't know everything. As parents, we sometimes like to think we know everything as parents, but you know, go on that journey with your child. You know, if your child is you know, listening to Hamza Zortzis and Muhammad Hijab lectures, and you have no idea what the words that are coming out of their mouth, then go on that journey with them. Pick up a dictionary or learn about epistemology and all of these things. Why? Because that's what your young person is, you know, is exploring. Just like, you know, sometimes when we put it into religious connotations, it gets a bit difficult. I answered one of the questions in the Q&A using the same example, that if you were a family who love fishing, you know, I love it. If you're a family who love fishing, all you talk about in the house is fishing, all the gear that you buy is fishing, all the stuff that you watch is fishing. You talk about where are we going to go fish next, you know, where's the next pond, we're going to go on holiday, we're going to take our rods, and oh, have you seen they've got a new rod out? And it becomes your life, it becomes your experience, and you're on that journey with your child. We have that with our hobbies because our hobbies excite us, our hobbies are interesting, our hobbies, like, you know, whether it's hiking or football or fishing or skiing or snowboarding, you know, you're always like, oh yes, I need to get a new pair of skis, and you know, where's the snow out this year, and have you seen Turkey have got a new snow, because it's your life, it's fun, it's experience. You know,
Excuse me.
go have that experience with your young person, go through the journey with them.
Sorry, Ayub, to interrupt. There's a question from me. Sorry to interrupt there. There's a question from Mijan that I just want to take before we conclude. Mijan Kamali? Mijan, could you unmute yourself?
Oh, hello, assalamu alaikum. Sorry, that's my husband's name, but I've logged in from his one.
No problem.
I didn't realize it was on there. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question, brother. That you know, like we've all been through our own identity crisis, and I feel like we still are somewhat trying to, you know, like there was that one when we were young and teenagers, and now as parents, and you know, we relate. Like, say, my child's not old enough to have a crisis, but my nieces and nephews, I'm seeing that as soon as they get to a certain age, they withdraw themselves so much from like family gatherings. They always don't want to come, they don't want to turn up, and then you feel like you don't want to be that nagging auntie because like you used to be the cool auntie, but now like you're like, oh, you need to come to these events. I don't know how to bring them back into the family. Like, I don't know, like I feel like they don't want to come to family events. They just want to be isolated and just have their own life. And we want them to grow up with us because we were so close before, and now there's like this big gap. And I don't know how we can like bridge that a little bit without sounding like we're telling them off, but it's actually coming from a place of love, but they see it as like, you know, I don't know when we you know, I don't know, at some point now, I feel like a lot of, like, I used to be a cool auntie, but now I feel like I'm seeing those aunties that are like, you know, the annoying aunties that are judging, but there's no judgment. But how can we come across as being non-judgmental, but also advise our children?
Waqas, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you for that question. That's a very important point. I can hear myself. So that's a very important point. Thank you, Mrs. Kamali. Is it Liju or?
Yes, it's Liju. Yeah.
Hi, I recognize you from the retreat. So brilliant question. Thank you so much for that.
It's okay. Thank you.
Ayub?
This is you know,
we're talking about young people.
I was tempted to say that.
Yep.
We think that we're the cool uncle, we're the cool auntie. We never were, really. It's just in our own head. But I'm sure you were. I'm sure you were.
No, she is. No, she is. I know. I've met these guys, and a brilliant bunch. I'm telling you, they're all cool. Every one of them is cool, mashallah.
The best kind of, and again, this goes back to what we teach, what we train our youth workers on. You know, this is stage 1 of our youth engagement framework, is to be real with them. You know, just like if you were to invite your friends, your mates around to your house and you were to host them, you know, you treat them in a certain way. You know, let's say you have your friends around, you have your mates around, and someone spills a drink. You're not going to tell them off, send them in the corner, go get the broom out and clean up. No, you are their host. You know, they're your friends. You don't worry about it. You know, you'll clean it up, you'll sort it out, you'll get them another drink. You know, sometimes when it comes to engaging with young people, we become very kind of standoffish and very authoritarian when there's no need to be. Like, be friends with them, be real with them, find out what it is that they like to do, and do it with them if they want you to be there. You know, if they want you to be in that space. But really treat them, if you treat them as friends and you see yourself as a host, and again, so the volunteers that we have who run our youth hubs, we actually don't use the word volunteer. We call them hosts, because the minute you call yourself and see yourself as a host, you know, you have guests, you have mehman, you know, it's a whole different way that you comport yourself. Yeah, inshallah, I hope that's beneficial. Waqas, you're on mute again.
I'm a millennial. You got to forgive me. I'm showing my age now. But what you said there, just to follow on for that for Liju, there was a question that came in from one of the parents. I think it was Fazana Hussein, and she wrote, "Conversation is an art. Do you think parents could benefit from learning conversation techniques and how to actively listen to a young person that may come to you that has conflicting thoughts and opinions to the parent or the family?" I just thought it's a related. I can see correlation between what Fazan is asking there and what Liju's raising there, and that's a common problem. That's not just specific to your family. I'm finding, and again, I've seen this in the focus groups, and when we meet again, Liju, inshallah, sometime in the summer or whenever we cross paths again, I would love to give you some further insight about some of the qualitative feedback that I'm getting, frank feedback from young boys and girls about what's going through their head in those situations. And a lot of it comes down to the fear and of being judged, and something's happened in the past. So there's trauma there. And I just felt it was important to bring this question in that Fazana is actually a question that she put in, but she summed it up, and there's a short and sweet answer to that, is that a lot of our solutions are going to be moving forward. Young people are telling us that what you need to be doing is having open, honest conversations in a non-judgmental way. So people should be able to express themselves. Because if they don't express them to you, they go find people on the online. We had 78% people go online, young people, to learn about their Islam because they can't talk to their parents. They feel lonely. 1 in 3 feels lonely at home with their own parents. So there's lots of things around conversation, and in educational terms, in the classroom, that's called dialogical learning. So learning through dialogue, as opposed to just teaching and hit and run education. And again, that deserves another session, and we have another session by an educator on, hopefully on dialogical learning and conversational learning.
If we have 30 seconds, one of the key things is trust. What we have with our youth workers, what we train them on is that even if they have one engagement with a young person, they're able to build a rapport and build trust with that young person, that the young person is able to open up and share, things that they don't share with anyone. Absolutely. And that can happen. I've seen it happen in just a single session. It's not, they're going along for 18 sessions and finally on session 18, they break and they share. No, it can be done, because if you build that rapport, build that trust with young people, that is the first step towards navigating any of these things. We've descended a lot into parenting, or type of, because I think maybe based on the audience, but really young people, they just need people to have their back, and if we can do that as parents, but if we can also create our institutions and our masajid and our youth clubs to have that, then suddenly things will be different. If a young person is so afraid to make one mistake in front of you, for fear of being reprimanded, then they'll never will. Of course, they'll hide away, they'll be shy, they'll be reclusive, because who wants to be scolded because you didn't put your cup on a coaster, honestly.
Yeah. We don't have time, unfortunately, but I would love to add to that. But Ayub and Abdur-rahman, we've come to the end of our session. Can you give me your top 1, 2, 3 priorities for parents, and your top priorities? You mentioned the masjids and the madrasas and the youth clubs, so the institutes. So one for the parents. Can you give me top 1 or 2 priorities to help them navigate around this identity crisis amongst young people? And if the other one could do for the mosques, that would be great.
Abdur-rahman, which one do you want
to I'll take mosques.
I could have bet £100 he was going to say mosques.
After you, Abdur-rahman, you go first.
So I think the top priority is for mosques. I think the first is to probably just be more open to these kind of changes, and that's been my experience personally. That kind of I've had conversations where mosque trustees have said to me, "As well, why do you need activities in the mosque? People should come here because they love the mosque. You should come here." And I was like, okay, so where are all the children then, right? So one is I think mosque trustees and institutions need to be more open to what the reality of the situation is, and second would be to be more open to listening to the young people. So if step A is, one, acknowledge the problem, step B is, and don't think you can solve the problem all by yourself. As a 40, 50, 60-year-old trustee, what a young person will be going through. So definitely, set up set up a youth committee that is actually full of youth, I would say, or, at least has some youth in it, so that you're not just kind of telling them how you think you should solve the problem, but you hear how they want to solve it. I think those would be my top 2 points.
Fantastic. For parents?
Number one, build a relationship based on trust with your child. Failure or making mistakes is an inevitable part of life. Trust them to learn. You learn through doing. You learn through doing. Second takeaway. Second takeaway would be align your identities and prioritize what is most important to you. So if Islam is an add-on to your life, it will be an add-on to your child's life. If you just about make time to pray, your children will just about make time to pray. If you prioritize, watching football over praying salah, then that's what your child will do. I remember there was a very famous instance where there was a group of people and everyone got up to pray except for one father and one son, and the son was old, an adult, and everyone was like, "Oh, why are you getting up to pray with everyone else?" And in a friendly way, and he said, "Oh, my dad didn't stand up, so I'm not standing up." And that's it. Children model the behavior of the parent.
That's two succinct, very good points that you've made there. Just going back to Liju and some of the other questions about parenting and what you've just said there, you towards the end about building that emotional relationship or that emotional connection with the children. The next webinars that we've got in line, following on from this, because mental health has come up today, and emotional well-being and the emotional connection between us as different personalities is really, really important. And again, going back to what Liju, you were saying about the the young people just feeling somewhat disconnected, I just wanted to touch upon now is a good time to mention, if I can get it up, here we go, I had it. The next webinar for us is going to be talking about mental health and looking at what strategies that we can use to get better, to manage mental health issues. Now, that's on Saturday, and it will allow us to talk more about some of the mental health issues that we've come up, that cropped up in this webinar. Strategies for tackling the mental health crisis in both adults and children, because often we think about mental health, we just cite that for children, but our mental health is integral to their mental health, and it's really important to look at that. So that's a webinar that's going to be taking place. The tickets are live on Eventbrite now. They are again limited. I think it's 3 o'clock till, the timing's not on there, but it's 3 to 4 or 3 to 4:15. We have a clinical psychologist who works with young people joining us, and that would be a fantastic Q&A conversation to have with a experienced clinical practitioner. And then on Sunday, following on from that, Saturday we're looking at mental health. On Sunday we're looking at emotional well-being, but also emotional intelligence, which is we're looking at something which I think is really, really key into how humans develop, or humans' relationships develop, and that is personality types, psychoanalysis of personality types, love languages, according to the way Dr. Gary Chapman has taught us. Do you know yourself, your spouse, and your child? Because ultimately you got yourself there as an individual, and then you got you as a married couple. So you as a couple, the key to effective parenting, as Ayub was saying, is emotional connection, emotional well-being, emotional intelligence, but also preceding parenting is actually a healthy marriage, a positive marriage, a marriage where two people are working together, they're on the same, singing from the same sheet, to say. So the personality types and love languages on Sunday with a life coach, a practitioner, a certified parent coach who also is qualified in Montessori, will be a fantastic 2 sessions over the next few days. That's Saturday and Sunday this weekend. The weather's awful for this weekend. The forecast is really bad for the whole of the UK. You might as well stay in, folks, and enjoy and tune into these webinars and improve our mental health and improve our emotional well-being, because outside there is going to be quite cold. I'd like to just end on a quote, actually, that's not here for some reason, unfortunately, but I thought it was here at the end. It's a quote that the late Desmond Tutu gave us, and his quote he gave, actually he just passed away recently, but his quote goes something like this. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they are falling in. And that's absolutely key to our thinking, our solutions, is that we've got to stop talking about people now saving them. You know, to simply put it, prevention is better than cure. We've got to dig deep, and we've got to ask the questions. The questions are more important than the answers. This is a saying at Amal. We've got to ask the questions and listen attentively. And that's the key thing here, to have conversations like Fazana was saying. Our learning in the classroom and the madrasas needs to be dialogical learning. In other words, learning through conversations, young people asking questions and not afraid to ask those questions in a safe, open space. I feel that emotional intelligence, emotional well-being, good mental health, like Salim Bayat was saying in the chat, I think these are going to be key to solving, if not, eradicating half of the problems that we're talking about. Certainly not, it's a lot more complicated than that, but I do feel from my conversations with young people and my understanding of their issues is that they just want to be heard, and they just want to be seen, and they just want to be valued for who they are, no matter how different their opinions may be. So these are the sort of learning points from today's webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been beneficial, inshallah. You can take whatever summaries and takeaway points that you want from here. Thank you so much to our two speakers, Ayub and Abdur-rahman. No doubt we'll be seeing more of you guys in due course, inshallah, in the coming months. Keep up with the research, Abdur-rahman. Make sure you're having plenty of cup of tea and coffee, and you've been taken care of, because those numbers are really important for us to analyze. And inshallah, I would love to be sharing our data with you and the findings with you, and working collaboratively with you for the benefit of the wider community. Muslim or non-Muslim, young people are a amazing bunch of people, and weird creatures that we all were once upon a time, and we've just got to understand where they're coming from.
Hey, we still are.
Thank you so much.
Jazakallah for having us.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again to all of our viewers and attendees. You can now, inshallah, go on to Eventbrite and book for the weekend. Thank you so much once again. If you do need to get in touch with us, there are the contact details. You've been a brilliant bunch. Thank you for your contributions in the chat and the question and answer bank. And we will end it there. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.